Hi everyone, this is a quick video taking a look at the English Language Paper 1 Question 4 question for the exam paper Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. Now this video has been designed to help you understand the question and how to really approach writing the question as well. If you like this video, you can please check out our other videos that are using the same resource, the same extract, and they all kind of tie in together. So if you want to have a good full practice of a paper, release questions 1 to 4, you'll be able to find it on this channel as well. So the first thing is, what is question 4 about, and what kind of things do you need to include? Now this is a question that a lot of people struggle with, so it's really important to think about breaking down the question. So the question will focus around a statement made by another student who has read the same extract that you are faced with. It normally focuses on the second half of the extract, and it is worth 20 marks. To actually answer this question effectively, you need to evaluate the methods used by the writer. Now this is different from making an analysis. When you evaluate, it's about making a critical judgment, and when we say the methods, we're talking about both the language techniques and the structural techniques that have been used in this part of the text. What do you need to include? You need to begin your writing by addressing the statement and saying if you agree or disagree with what the student has said. Now the vast majority of teachers will tell you it's always better to agree with what the student has said, because it's going to make it that much easier for you when you write your response. You need to make appropriate references to the text, and when we say that, we mean that you need to use quotations to support your argument. You need to break down how the writer's methods impact our understanding, and that's really where it comes into the idea of looking at the language techniques or the structural techniques that have been used to help our understanding. You need to structure your response appropriately. So very simply doing something like a point evidence explain kind of paragraph, or SQI, or whatever basic structure that a lot of people use for, let's say, question 2 or one of the lower level questions, won't do it for this question. It's asking you to evaluate the methods, so you really do need to think about the connotations and the techniques that have been used by the writer. You need to write 2 to 3 detailed paragraphs. Remember, this question is worth 20 marks, so the amount that you're writing needs to reflect the amount of marks that are available in order to get the highest grade possible. Look at the exam question below. As we look at this question, I'd like to think about, what is it really asking you to focus on? Now question 4 does throw a lot of people off, because just when you look at it, it does look like quite a large question, and it can sometimes be quite overwhelming for students. So let's take a look at it now and see what the important aspects are of this question. So it says, now look at lines 22 to the end. A student, having read this extract, said, the way that the writer describes Abby in this part makes us feel sympathetic towards her character. To what extent do you agree? In your response, you should consider how Abby is treated by her husband, evaluate how the writer creates sympathy for Abby, and support your response with references to the text. So now let's break it down and see what you really need to think about when approaching this question. So the first thing to think about comes right at the top of this question here, is to make sure you focus specifically on the lines that are mentioned in the exam question. Now it might seem a little bit obvious, but it happens every single year. People will talk about the wrong part of the extract. So let's say if you talk about lines 21 or 20, because it hasn't been specified in the actual question, then you won't get marks if you're referring to a different part of the source. So absolutely 100% must focus on lines 22 to the end. The next part is really the main body of the exam question. So a student having read this extract said, the way that the writer describes Abby in this part makes us feel sympathetic towards her character. And what we need to do here is we need to decode or break down the key elements of the question. So if you've already read the extract, if not, then the link will be provided at the description for this video. If you've already read it, then you'll realise that Abby is not the only character. So because this question is specifically saying that you need to focus on Abby, we don't really need to consider any other characters. This is going to be the main focus of the question. So the way the writer describes Abby in this part makes us feel sympathetic towards her character, and again we're going to underline the word sympathetic here, because that is something that you need to think about and evaluate when you look back at the text. The next part then is to saying whether you agree or disagree. And if you remember from our previous part of the video, the first thing you need to do when you're structuring your response is say whether you agree or disagree. The good thing about this question is that you have a choice. You don't have to agree. You can partially agree or you can disagree. It's entirely up to you. The important thing is that you critically evaluate what the writer has produced and that you're able to formulate your own opinion and decide whether you agree or disagree with a student's statement. Now, all of the questions in the exam paper will come with bullet points to help guide you on your response. So these should be actually taken into account of, and they're actually helping you to think about the kind of things that might help you get a reasonable answer. So the first one says, consider how Abby is treated by her husband. So even though it specifies in the question that we're just focusing on Abby, it might be important to think about her relationship with her husband. This might also imply that their relationship isn't particularly positive, so therefore it might be something to comment on in your response. The second one, evaluate, again a very critical word here, very important for this question. It shows that you need to really break it down, you really need to think about the most important things about the response and why or if it makes us feel sympathetic towards the character. So evaluate how the writer creates sympathy for Abby. Again, it's using this keyword that we saw in the question as well. And the final one, support your response with reference to the text. And again, whenever we say reference to text, we mean you absolutely 100% must use quotations to support your answer. If you don't do that, it's just going to mean you're not going to get the best marks available. Moving on then. So an important thing to think about when you're actually decoding your question is thinking about the keyword, and this is what we're going to do at the moment. Now, in order to actually understand what we mean by the keyword, we first must look at a synonym. So what is a synonym and why are they important for this question? Well, if you're not aware already, a synonym then is a word or phrase that means exactly or nearly the same as another word. What we're going to do now is we're going to try to explore the different synonyms for the word sympathetic, which was one of the key words, one of the most important words that we had there for question 4. So here we are, we have sympathetic. The reason why we need to explore the synonyms is because rather than constantly saying in your point, the writer makes us feel sympathetic towards Abby, it's going to sound a little bit repetitive and it's not really the best thing to be doing in your writing. So a good idea to do is to think about what other words could you relate this to? What other kind of meanings could sympathetic have? Now these are some ideas that a previous student has come up with. It might be that you don't agree with them and that's fine, but it's important to take some time for yourself and to think, what does sympathetic really mean for you? So here are some other words that the student was able to come up with. So first of all, it was concerned. So are we concerned about Abby? Again, it's already shown that she's got probably a traumatic or troublesome relationship with her husband, so that might make us feel concerned. Pity. Now this is quite different from concerned or sympathetic. It's kind of got a similar meaning, but pitying kind of has a little bit of negative connotations to it as well. Likeable. We generally feel that we like characters who don't have everything in the world. We kind of try to champion the underdog, especially in a lot of British literature. So maybe the fact that we feel sympathetic also makes us find that the character Abby is quite likeable, perhaps. And compassionate. Maybe we feel a sense of compassion towards this character as well. Now let's look at the extracts, and as we do, we're going to try and identify anything that makes us feel sympathetic for the character. As we do this, we're also going to remember about the synonyms and try to think about how we could use those to structure our response as well. So it says, a silent tear tracked its way through the expensive makeup on Abby's face. As more followed, she let them flow freely, feeling her emotions come out with each drop. Even though Harry sat feet away from her, they might as well have been on different continents. The jewellery, the fine clothes, the house, everything he had cloaked her in felt like a dead weight around her neck. So now it'd be important to have a look through, see if there's anything here we can identify as making us feel particularly sympathetic towards this character. We know at the start of it that she's clearly not happy. And we have this from a wonderful technique here. I'm sure you know it. It's alliteration, right? You've got tear tracked its way through the expensive makeup on Abby's face. And the alliteration here helps emphasize the fact that she's crying, and therefore we can infer that she's definitely not happy. Something has happened that has caused her to be upset or miserable at this point. As more followed, she let them flow freely. Another example of alliteration there. Feeling emotions come out with each drop. Now we have a kind of a strange sense of a hyperbole or metaphorical speak now, where it says even though Harry sat just feet away from her, they might as well have been on different continents. So I want you to look at that bit there and just think, what does that really imply about their relationship? And does that make us feel sympathetic or concerned or worried for the character of Abby? So what does it really mean there if they're on different continents? So what the writer is trying to imply there is that even though in a very literal sense they're sat quite close together, in a much more figurative, metaphorical sense, they're miles apart in an emotional spectrum. Now it goes on to talk about the expensive things that she's been able to have due to the relationship. So the jewellery, the fine clothes, the house, everything he had cloaked her in felt like a dead weight around her neck. Of course, the first thing you might pick out here is that we have a nice simile. So it felt like a dead weight would be a simile. We've also got some interesting words here, especially the verb cloaked her in. Doesn't sound particularly nice. Doesn't have very positive connotations as well. So what I'd like you to do is just spend a minute, have a look back over this part and see if there's anything else that makes you feel sympathetic. There are, other things we could talk about because this is just a small portion of the passage as well. So if you'd like to actually take some time, read through the full extract and see if you can find anything that makes us feel sympathetic towards this character, then please feel free to do so. Complete the table to help plan your response. So now what we've done is we've got a bunch of different quotations. Some of these have come from the quotes that we found in the extract previously, and some of them have also come from the rest of the extracts from line 22 and onwards. So the first one we've already had a look at. When you're identifying quotations, when you're starting to plan your response, it's important to think about what kind of technique is available and what can we infer. So what does that really tell the audience about the character, and does it make us feel sympathetic? Because again, that is really the root of the question. So you've got that first one, a silent tear tracked its way through the expensive makeup. The second one, another one we've looked at, even though Harry sat just feet away from her, they might as well have been on different continents. Number 3, Harry gave a small snort to something on the TV, but otherwise seemed oblivious to his wife's actions. And the last one, a stream of hot vomit struck the freshly varnished floor. Now what I'm going to do now is go ahead and I'm going to start looking through the answers, the techniques, and what we can infer from each of these quotations. If you'd like to pause the video now and go through it at your own time, please feel free to do so. Check your understanding against the ideas below. So now what we've got is we've got a few of the quotations that we looked at previously. We also have a few more that's come from the rest of the extract, which was from lines 22 and below. So we have our first one, obviously a silent tear tracked its way through the expensive makeup. And we can say that we have alliteration here with the tear tracked and also personification. So from this we can infer that despite being financially secure, Abby still seems to be suffering emotionally. We have personification because when it says that the tear tracked, it's making it seem like the tear is actually physically moving on its own accord, and therefore that may be considered as personification. For the second one though, even though Harry sat just feet away from her, they might as well have been on different continents. So again, they've used this hyperbolic language here just to emphasize or to exaggerate Abby's sense of isolation. It just helps the reader to understand that the relationship with her husband is poor. So this might make her seem like a more likable character, despite the fact that she clearly has a lot of wealth and a lot of money in her life. She doesn't really have the things that ultimately we need to make us happy in life, which is love, and friendship and things like that. Number 3, Harry gave a small snort to something on the TV, but otherwise seemed oblivious to his wife's actions. So here we have sibilance. So sibilance is very similar to alliteration, but instead we're going to focus on the S sound. Now this is a fantastic one to use when you come to your own creative writing, because sibilance gives us a very negative connotations with this S sound that kind of comes across, and that is normally associated with evil actions or negative things like that. Okay, so what we can infer from this is the repetition of the S sound creates a negative impression for the reader. Additionally, the adjective oblivious indicates the husband's complete lack of care or concern. So you can see there with this one, we're identifying a language technique that's being used, then we're zooming in and we're trying to think about what key word has been used and how does that affect our interpretation, and does it make us feel sympathetic towards her character. The final one then. A stream of hot vomit struck the freshly varnished floor. So from this one we have imagery. Imagery is anything that helps create a picture in the reader's mind. We can see there that that's going to be quite an aggressive image for the reader. And we also have the aggressive verb as well. So the noun stream creates the impression that she's throwing up a lot, creating a sense of concern for the character, right? So again, this might be one where we use one of the synonyms here. We might think that it makes us feel a bit of concern for her, or pity, or something like that, because whatever is wrong is physically having its toll on her. And of course, that's never going to be a good thing either. Look at the example below to help write your own response. So this is a student that's actually attempted the question. I'd like to think about, whether this is a positive or negative response. So the student has said, I agree completely that the writer makes us feel sympathetic for Abby in this part of the text. Everything he had cloaked her in felt like a dead weight around her neck. The writer has used a simile here to show Abby's feelings. Additionally, the adjective used in the phrase dead weight has negative connotations, which suggest Abby is feeling trapped and is suffering. This would make the reader feel sorry for her, and as we get an accurate idea of the torment she is feeling. So this is what I'd like to think about. Does this response accurately answer the question? If you think about the question, it was, do we feel sympathetic towards Abby in this part of the extract? So does this actually address what it needed to address in the exam question? Does it follow a piece paragraph? Now, a piece paragraph is a fantastic thing to use in order to actually help structure your writing. And if you're not too sure about how to structure this, please check out the same video in the series that looks at question 2 for paper 1. And then we're going to look at the mark scheme on the next slide just to see what kind of mark this response is going to get. Without looking at the mark scheme, it's going to be very difficult to know, what you need to include or what level you need to actually achieve in order to get a good mark on the paper overall. If you'd like to pause the video here and take more time, read through the response, or even use it as a starting point for your own writing, please feel free to do so. I'm now going to go ahead and take a look at the mark scheme. Now we're going to use the mark scheme then to assess the response. If you wrote one yourself, please feel free to do so yourself and to use it to make your own judgment on your work. So we have the main levels here. Obviously you can get lower than a level 2, because 6 out of 10 marks is still quite a reasonable response for some students, but we're going to try and teach to the top here, and we're going to try and aim for the best grade possible. Now, one of the things that people struggle with when you look at the mark scheme is that a lot of the time the phrases or the words that are used are quite educated words. English examiners love to use some really posh words to explain where the marks are available, but all you need to do is try and break it down as you go along. We'll start off at the bottom level, because this is what a teacher will typically do. So you can see there then for level 2, it says some understanding and comment 6 to 10 marks. So it shows some attempts at evaluation. Some of the language they use are things like some, which means they've tried but there probably isn't a lot. If you look up above the same sentence in level 3, instead of saying some, it says clear. And then at the top of the mark scheme, the level 4 is perceptive and detailed. So you can see there how for each bracket in the grading for the mark scheme, it's going up just a little bit each time. The words are becoming more educated, and therefore so should your response. It should include a little bit more analysis and evaluation as you go up the levels. So we'll look back at the level 2 one then. So shows some attempts at evaluation, makes some evaluative comments. So it might mean you've said, the writer has used a simile, but you might leave it there. You might not have gone into much detail. You might not have zoomed in on a key word or a key technique or something like that. Next one, shows some understanding of the writer's methods. So when they say some understanding of the writer's methods, typically it means you have probably said, the writer has used a simile to do this or to do that in one paragraph, but you probably haven't carried on this kind of structure in the rest of your writing. Select some appropriate textual references. Again, that word some, just saying that you haven't used enough quotations to support your ideas. And the last one, make some response to the focus of the statement. Again, that word some, a very irritating word really when you think about it in the mark scheme. So all it is saying there is that you haven't quite done enough, you haven't used enough quotations, you haven't shown a good understanding of the writer's methods, and you haven't really referred back to the question, or in this case the focus of the statement, which is whether we feel sympathetic towards the character. Moving up then for level 3, you can see that it's doing this in a little bit of a higher level essentially. So it evaluates clearly the effects on the reader. So again, effects on the reader, some people will forget to do this in their response, but it is an important part of your paragraph structure, and if you're doing your piece paragraph structure, it's what would come at the end as well. So comments on the effects on the reader is important for this question. Shows a clear understanding of the writer's methods. Again, not just saying the writer's used a simile, talking about every single technique that has been used in your quotation, identifying the word classes, the key words and things like that that help actually give us that impression towards the character. Select a range of relevant quotes. So a range then, again, a little bit annoying because it's not giving you a specific number of quotes that you need to include. So you need to think, how many do they mean by a range? Well, if you're doing, let's say 2 to 3 paragraphs, then you need to do a minimum of 3 quotations just to get into that bracket there. Makes a clear and relevant response to the focus of the question, the focus of the statement. So if you go off task, which a lot of us do every now and again, especially when we're in an exam, you've got to make sure that you rein it back in and that you're talking about the actual question that you need to focus on. And then level 4 at the top of it, evaluates critically. So if you're evaluating it critically, that's really breaking it down as much as possible. The effects on the reader. Again, effects on the reader. Very important element of your piece paragraph. Show perceptive understanding of the writer's methods. Okay, so showing perceptive understanding shows us that you're really going to go in depth. You're showing that you really understand all of the techniques that are going towards this response. So if you're doing things like if you've mentioned a simile in your first paragraph, avoid talking about a simile in your next one, just to show the examiner that you understand that there are other methods and other things that you're available to talk about, and you're not just struggling to focus on the same one. Select a range of judicious textual details. When they say judicious, that means the most appropriate quotations that are available in the extracts. And the final one, develops a convincing and critical response to the focus of the statement. And again, you've got the focus of the statement there. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit there. If you have actually had a go at doing your own response, please feel free to have a go. If you're not too sure about whether your response is any good, please leave us a comment, like and subscribe, and we can also have a look at your response for you and try and give you some feedback to help you improve. If you need any additional help or support, then new videos will be uploaded to our channel every single week. Alternatively, you can leave us a comment, like and subscribe. If you still can't find anything on this channel, then please check out our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thank you ever so much for listening, guys, and all the best with all your work and revision in the future. Bye.